This is Tracy Guy Decker, and you're listening to Deep Thoughts About Stupid Shit. Because pop culture is still culture. And shouldn't you know what's in your head? Today, I will be sharing my deep thoughts about the 1973 animated Robin Hood from Disney with my sister, Emily Guy Birkin, and with you. Let's dive in. Have you ever had something you love dismissed because it's just pop culture? What others might deem stupid shit, you know matters. You know it's worth talking and thinking about. And so do we. So come overthink with us as we delve into our deep thoughts about stupid shit. This show is a labor of love, but that doesn't make it free to produce. If you enjoy it even half as much as we do, please consider helping to keep us overthinking. You can support us at our Patreon. There's a link in the show notes. Or leave a positive review so others can find us. And of course, share the show with your people. Okay, I know you've seen this movie because I think we've seen it together. So I'm talking about the 1973 animated Robin Hood as a fox.
Mm-hmm. Little John as a bear.
Yeah. So what comes to mind? What do you remember? What's coming up when I mention this piece of pop culture?
So there's a couple of things. I had a weird crush on Robin Hood as a fox. And I think some of that is also his voice. I like British accents, even though, nobody else is British.
We will be talking about that.
That's something I remember. My sense of cartoon snakes being able to make their eyes into spirals and hypnotize people comes from Sir Hiss in this. Let's see. The sheriff has some pretty funny lines that I say. Doesn't he call someone fuzzy britches or something like that?
He is bushel britches. Other people call him bushel britches.
Bushel britches, okay. Which has become fuzzy britches. And that's what my family calls each other, which is not from the film.
But inspired by, apparently.
Inspired by. The other couple things that stand out for me is sometimes the ups outnumber the downs, but not in Nottingham. That song runs through my head pretty often. The Odelaly. And then this is a weird thing, but I remember noticing before I learned that because this is hand animated, hand drawn, they would reuse scenes. Which makes sense. I mean, it's so much work. And so there's a scene where the little kids are dancing in early on, and then it happens again, and it's the same scene. And so I remember noticing that as an eagle-eyed child before I learned what was going on there, why that happened. And then I think, this is where I learned the phrase absence makes the heart grow fonder. Yeah, I tried to introduce this to my kids a couple of times. And I wish I could remember. My youngest said something about the rhinoceroses. The rhinoceroses just create chaos. It was something really just adorable and funny. He was 4 or 5 at the time. So those are my kind of general feelings about this film that I have a lot of nostalgia for. So tell me, why are we talking about Robin Hood today?
So when I was a kid, all the way through maybe into high school, if somebody asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up, I would say I wanted to be an animator for Disney specifically. And I think that this movie was not the only. There was lots of animation in our childhood, but this movie strongly contributed to that desire. I just loved it. I just really loved it. It was just so charming. And it's one of those films that, especially because we're doing this project, then we sort of think how was I first introduced to this piece of pop culture is a question that we ask ourselves. I have no idea. You might as well, it would be like asking me when's the first time you had matzo-ball soup? It's just a thing that, and it's comfort food in that way. Ghostbusters was for me, but even older. Dad had Disney Channel at his house or his apartment when we were kids. It must have been on that. I vaguely remember watching it at Grandma Betta's house and with Chris, our cousin, because there's a scene where the lady in waiting, who's a chicken, is doing she's football player, on a football field, with the rhinoceri.
Yes.
And I didn't understand what that was. And I can remember Grandma explaining, or Dad, it was at Grandma's house. Anyway, this thing is just baked into my like entertainment DNA, like deeply, deeply. And even into my aspirations of sort of the kind of art that I wanted to create. And so that's why I wanted to talk about it. And on rewatch, as with so many things, this like beautiful, fun, like piece of fluff from my childhood is turning out to be a lot less benign than I would like. So okay. So for those of you who haven't seen Disney's Robin Hood, it is an animated film where all of the characters are animals, and it is the story of Robin Hood is an historical fiction or
fable,
maybe fiction, fable, whatever. Yeah. It is very much presented as a fairy tale in this movie. And so it opens actually with a book. So we're looking at a book that then becomes animated. And there is a narrator of sorts as a rooster who introduces himself as a bard, which is an old-fashioned way of saying folk singer. That's what he tells us. And he sings that song that you referenced, which I also love, about Nottingham. And so very first thing we do is we meet Robin Hood and Little John. Robin is a fox, Little John is a bear, the same bear animation as Baloo from the Jungle Book. Different color, but the same bear. And they're in the forest, just, doing their thing. So we very early are introduced to the fact that they are running from the law. And Little John says to Robin, Rob, I've been thinking, are we good guys or bad guys? Because we steal. So we're introduced, they steal from the rich to give to the poor. We're shown that right away. And then the story ensues where Prince John, who's in charge because his brother, King Richard, is off on a crusade, is taxing the people relentlessly. And so the people of Nottingham are just suffering under the burden of this overtaxation. But Prince John is a clown. He's a villain, but like he's really a clown. The true villain with any kind of malice is the sheriff. Bushel Britches himself. He's a wolf, but he's huge. He's bigger even than, or as big as the bear, Little John. Robin is in love with Maid Marian, who inexplicably is the niece of the lions, who are the
Maid Marian is also
Prince.
A fox.
She's a vixen. Yeah, I mean, like actually a female fox. In order to meet her, we see the cruelty of the wolf sheriff when he interrupts a young rabbit's birthday party and steals his birthday present, which is a farthing. Not steals, but collects it as taxes. Robin then comes in disguise as a blind beggar and gives the kid a bow and arrow and his own hat, and gives the widow woman, the mom rabbit, some money. And she says, bless you. Then the kids go off. The birthday boy and two of his siblings and a turtle friend go off to play with the bow and arrow. They end up in the castle. They meet Maid Marian and her lady-in-waiting.
Who is a hen.
A hen, a big one. A
really
real big one.
Seems like a possible mistake watching over a fox.
There's also the rabbit and foxes thing going on, so... Yeah, so we meet Maid Marian and we learn that she is in fact still in love with Robin, and she's afraid that he's forgotten her. That's where your absence makes the heart grow fonder happens. Cut to Robin in Sherwood Forest stirring the stew pot while Little John hangs up laundry, and he's totally mooning, pining for Marian. Okay, so the love story set up. Prince John sets up an archery tournament to try and trap Robin. Robin comes in disguise. He does get trapped, but then there's he gets away, there's a scuffle, there's a big fight, and Marian and Robin declare their love for one another during the fight. So Marian and Clucky, the lady-in-waiting, escape with, Robin's merry men off into Sherwood Forest. There's another entrapment attempt when they say they're going to hang Friar Tuck. So Robin and Little John break Friar Tuck out of jail, steal all the gold, destroy the castle, and then go off again into the forest. And then we get a little play, acting and dancing, making fun of John. And then they get married and they live happily ever after.
Well, and doesn't King Richard come back at the end?
At the very end, King Richard comes back. He's at the wedding. He makes a joke which had been made before. They have an outlaw for an in-law.
Yeah.
Yeah, which we actually had heard before in the very, very beginning. Actually, when Friar Tuck tells Robin that before too long, King Richard's going to have an outlaw for an in-law.
Is Marian Richard's daughter? No.
I mean,
okay. She's related
know.
Somehow.
She definitely is John's niece. She refers to him as uncle.
Okay. And so that would mean, since Richard is John's brother,
well,
she's... Oh, well,
or they have another sibling.
Yeah. Well, no, that would mean that Richard is also her uncle.
Either her father or also her uncle, yes.
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
So they're related either as a child, as an offspring, or as a niefling. Niefling and uncle. So I guess niece, they call her. Anyway, so that's the rough story. And from my childhood, it's actually anti-authoritarian and all about redistributing wealth. I didn't think of it as a kid, but looking back on it, it was about doing good, even in the face of bad laws.
Greed and
yeah. And the music was awesome. Like you said, I loved, I still,
Robin Hood and Little John
walking through the forest. Yeah. And every time has its ups and downs. Yeah. So let me start at the beginning with the Bechdel test, our good old fashioned standby.
Yes.
Thank you once again, Alison Bechdel. Done pass. There are two female named characters, but they only talk about men. They only talk about Robin. It's Marian and Clucky.
Well, what about one of the little rabbit siblings?
Doesn't have a name.
Doesn't have a name. And the church mouse wife?
She doesn't speak to another female character.
She doesn't speak to another female character.
She doesn't have a name either. She's just little sister.
Okay, gotcha.
So it does not pass the Bechdel test. Marian is a little bit more than a sexy lamp, but not much, right? In terms of her relationship with Robin, she's a sexy lamp, which, folks, there's a bonus episode over on a Patreon where we explain all these things if you want to learn more about the Bechdel test or the sexy lamp. But shorthand, she has no agency and no actual action in the story. She does have an interaction with the rabbit kids and the turtle, but really she's mostly a trophy. And her only reason for being is to love Robin. So that's not great. But the thing that, as I'm rewatching this and thinking about it now, in terms of our project, the thing that I'm coming up against is the little Skippy, the rabbit, yells, "Death to tyrants!" This is a thing that they're it's totally anti-authoritarian, but it's not, because when Robin is caught and he is being held by the guards, the thing that his moment of rebellion and resistance, Prince John says, you're arrested for being a traitor to the crown. Robin says, "Traitor to the crown? That's King Richard's crown. Long live King Richard." And so ultimately, it's not anti-authoritarian, right? It's not saying the system is messed up and we shouldn't have this, feudal system where we've got this hugely rich monarch and these, peasants living in squalor.
Crushed between his feet. Yeah.
Right. Who have every cent that they earn taxed away from them. That system is not at all skewered. What is skewered is that clown who is sitting on the throne when he shouldn't be. It should be that, much more regal looking lion who is off running a crusade. Crusade.
Yeah.
And as a Jewish person, that word has drips with villainy and danger and religious justification for persecution and violence. I know that is not the way it was taken by the broader culture in 1973, but that doesn't make that other stuff not true, right? So, and I did a very little, folks, I did a very little research on King Richard. So this is a 12th century king of England. who ran this crusade with two other European kings. It was the King's Crusade. It was the third crusade, where they were predominantly fighting Muslims to try and reclaim European control of the Holy Land. And Richard was just as conniving and dangerous as any 12th century king you can imagine, you know, having people assassinated and like trying to like marry off his daughter in order to cement treaties and stuff. I mean, like, he was not a paragon of virtue, is what I'm trying to, to convey here, you know? So that has been sort of a little bit of a, like, you know, skull blowing off the top of my head emoji as I'm thinking about it for our conversation here, in the ways in which the Robin Hood story could be presented to not be anti-authoritarian. You know, like, that's really like reiterating and underlining for me why we're doing this project, you know?
Yeah.
Because it feels like it is one of the ones in our culture that's what it's for, right? Like, that is that sort of stick it to the man. But that ain't it. Not here.
You know, you've got me thinking about the fact that the Kevin Costner Robin Hood that came out in the 90s. And I
vaguely remember.
Yeah. So Alan Rickman played the sheriff in that version. And they didn't have Prince John. They just had the sheriff. And it was an ensemble cast. And I believe that part of that decision was just to not muddy things. But at the same time, that also is a choice that makes it, you know, like, oh, we're against this bad apple.
Exactly. And that's
not against the system.
And that's exactly what this movie does as well. That's exactly what this movie
does. So
does.
there's no like questioning the feudal system and the reign of monarchs, which, yeah, when you think about it, like, that's not your crown. That's Richard's. Yeah, but nobody elected him.
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay. So that's a big thing that's like sitting there for me. Other things that, you know, come up as I'm watching this, you mentioned that Robin has a British accent. And I didn't pay attention to accents at all, not even a little, did not register. But I've been thinking about accents more personally, in part because of our Good Omens obsession and thinking about, you know, Michael Sheen's native Welsh accent and David Tennant's native Scottish, which neither of them use. Like, anyway, it's been in my head thinking about accents more. And so I was paying attention more. And so, as you noted, Robin is the only one with a British accent. Well, that's not true. Robin's the only one with an English accent, I think. Clucky is Scottish.
Oh, yes, that's right. And Marion, I think Marion is an American accent, or is she an American doing kind of like a Britishy,
like that wistful kind of.
Yeah.
So, and one of the things that I think is really interesting about that, though, is that the implied classism in these characters, like in particular, the fact that this love interest, that it's all different animals. And in fact, the bunny, the older sister bunny, Skippy's younger sister, but the oldest, whatever.
Oldest of the girls. Yeah.
Oldest of the girls. When they realize it's Robin Hood under the blind beggar costume, she's like, he's so handsome. Like, so there is at least admiration cross species, but the actual pairing, they're both foxes. And not only that, in order for Robin, this is my analysis, but in order for Robin to be worthy of this royal's attention and affection, he has to have markers of upper class status, including the RP, the sort of Queen's English accent of British English. And I totally missed that as a kid. I never would have picked up on that. Robin is surrounded by these American accent merry men, right? Little John and Friar Tuck, even our narrator, the rooster, it has this like American Southern drawl. He's a folk singer, he tells us. And Robin is one of them, but above them in some way.
Now, one thing that I think might be an important aspect, like for the history of this, is like Robin Hood was supposed to have been a highborn gentleman, like Sir Robert of Locksley, I think, and most of his merry men were not. So like Will Scarlet was supposed to be highborn as well. Friar Tuck is one of those where like clergy is kind of this weird middle
in between,
ground,
liminal.
Yeah, because you could be like a second born son and go into the clergy, or you could be a more commoner.
Right, it was a way to move up.
Yes. So I mean, so there is.
Yeah, and they actually make reference to that, because Robin says at one point when Little John's like, if you love her, go get her. And he's like, well, that's not how it works. You can't just stroll up to a woman and be like, hi, we were kids together. You want to get married? So like they do make reference to that in this film. And all of that backstory for me, I think is less important in terms of, not less important, but has less impact to the children watching this, understanding who belongs with whom.
Well, the way you're putting it, this is kind of reifying the importance of hierarchies, because instead of it being
exactly what I'm getting at.
Yeah, instead of it being anti-authoritarian, it's like, no, you jumped the line to Prince John, and
exactly.
It's not, and Robin is only worthy of Marion because he was a kid with her. They were highborn, both of them, not because what he does is worthy.
Exactly. That's exactly what I'm getting at. Thank you for articulating it that way.
Well, what's interesting is, does that mean that in order for Robin Hood to do what he does, to be an outlaw and try to take care of the poor, it has to be egregious? So like the villains are just, taking money left and right so that everybody's starving. And
they're all in debtor's prison. Like we actually see the debtor's prison where everyone we've met in town is now in prison.
Yes.
Except for the friar and the two little mice that you mentioned who are at the church.
Yes. And then they, to try to draw Robin Hood out, they plan to hang Friar Tuck, which is just shocking.
Which they react to even in the movie. Hang a man of the church?
But considering the fact that Robin is not anti-authoritarian, if Richard were there and it weren't quite so bad, would he still be willing to redistribute wealth? Like where it's not that everybody's starving, everybody's in the debtor's prison. It's just things are tough for Widow Rabbit. And because she's not allowed to do X, Y, or Z, and that's.
No, I think that's a legitimate question. And I think it actually is. The answer is in the movie, and the answer is no. Because when Little John, from the very first scene, says, are we good guys or bad guys because of all the stealing? Robin says, we're not stealing. Stealing's wicked. We're just borrowing a bit. And then Little John says, borrowing? Man, are we in debt? Which is funny. It's very funny.
Yeah.
But the implication still remains that, this is not a Marxist, this Robin of Locksley. He's not saying of course we're stealing. We're redistributing the wealth because it was ill-gained in the first place and they didn't actually deserve, it wasn't actually theirs. We're stealing it back. He doesn't say that.
Yeah.
He says, oh, we're just borrowing from folks who can afford it.
So here's something that's interesting to me. When I was getting my master's degree in English education, for those of you who don't know, I was a high school English teacher for 4 years. That's what I was trained to do. And then life went in a different direction. I had a couple of classes that were required that were about social issues in the classroom. I was student teaching at the time at a very wealthy district that had a brand new school that was just obscene. The kind of money that went into just aesthetics for the school. And I remember talking about I don't know how the way that I was in Ohio, and the way that Ohio funding works is that every single tiny little township and municipality has its own school district. Whereas where Tracie and I were from growing up, the entire county would have a school district, which meant that wealth inequality was spread out a little bit more. I'm not saying it was perfect, but it was better than what I saw where I taught. because, this tiny little municipality, like, not only do they have to pay for superintendent and all of that, instead of, one superintendent for something with like 50 high schools. In any case, right next door to the district where I was student teaching, there's a district that they're using 15-year-old out-of-date textbooks that are falling apart because they can't afford to buy new ones. And I was like, I don't feel like we can just take from this school district and give to this school district. Like there's something like, I don't know how to reconcile that. And I had two classmates, one who was just like, why not? Which I like was really glad to be challenged that way. And then another who was like, yeah, the churches should handle, like, like, we should not be mandating money going to anything. So like
churches?
Yeah. She was like, charity should come from faith groups, churches, things like that. Should not be anything that government takes care of.
I'm flabbergasted by that.
And it was not specifically about that, that dichotomy, like, where I was just like, I don't know, like, how we make this work, but, like, it's not fair that these kids don't have good textbooks and these kids have basically a chandelier in their dining hall. It was another something where it was talking about, it was the same class, different topic. It was talking about, I think, kids who are hungry. And this person was like, it's not the government's job to feed them. Like, this should be like the faith community's job.
Okay. I can't. I'm sorry.
So that is not an unusual opinion.
Stance. I know.
In the world I inhabit, because I now I write about finance. So I meet a lot of people in finance who did not take the same lessons I did. So what strikes me, like, that's the thing that I'm thinking about, because Friar Tuck is such an important character, and because there's that scene when Friar Tuck is arrested, and it's when the church mice
put their last farthing in the collection box, and then the sheriff comes and takes it as taxes. Yeah.
And it's really interesting when you start thinking about that classmate of mine who was just like, yeah, the churches should handle charity, and the fact that religious institutions are tax exempt in our country, in ways that are very much taken advantage of. And so, like, what is this message sending us? So, like, Friar Tuck believes it's his job to, help take care of the poor. And that's why he has a collection box and all of that. It's specifically to take care of the poor. And you know what? Here's government swooping in and taxing it. Now, it's an evil government and authoritarian and greedy, and not actually using the money to develop.
No, they make it clear that in this movie that the money's used only to make Prince John happy, to have it. Yeah. He's not even spending it. He's just counting it.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe this is obvious, but I feel like I should say it out loud. Like, one of the big differences between the animal kingdom of Nottingham and contemporary Ohio is that we're not in Ohio, in the United States, we're not all the same religion. Mm-hmm. Like, it's not like it's a parish and we all belong to the same. It's not.
Mm-hmm. Well, and then even like, I suspect that this classmate of mine would have said to that, oh, well, you don't have to be Christian to accept help.
Screw you.
But yeah. But like, there are soup kitchens where they won't let you have the food until you've prayed,
Chick-fil-A.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, it's also my right as an American to have no religion.
Mm-hmm. It is. It's also, if you are counting on faith communities to handle charity, they're only going to handle the charities that they're interested in.
Also, when the suffering, when the affliction is caused by the government, it is a cop-out to then say it's not the government's job. Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm bringing us back to the foxes.
Yes.
So it's interesting because one of the ways that the movie makers make it clear that Prince John is a bad guy is by his greediness, as I just said. He's not even spending the money. He's using it. He's just counting it.
Doesn't Sir Hiss say to him, like, why don't you count your money? That always cheers you up.
Yes. When he's really, like, Prince John is really mad because of the song that the townspeople have written.
Oh, yeah.
Too late to be known as John the First. He's sure to be known as John the Worst.
Yeah.
The phony king of England. Yeah. So he's really pissed off about this song, and he can't get past it. And so that Hiss is trying to get him out of it. And he says, why don't you count your money? That you haven't done that in a while. It always makes you happy. Okay. Greed. Greed is the fundamental cowardice.
There's also
posturing.
The childishness of because Prince John is also shown as like sucking his thumb and calling for his mom.
Yeah. But greed is one of the fundamental vices of this villain. And then with the jailbreak, when they get Friar Tuck out of jail, and also all of the townsfolk who are in debtor's prison, Robin goes to the royal treasury, which also happens to be Prince John's bedroom, and redistributes the wealth. Redistributes the wealth. He with Little John, he sets up like a pulley system with arrows, and they're sending out these bags of money. And my spouse happened to step in while I was watching it last night, while I was rewatching it. And it's like piles and piles and piles and piles of these bags of money. And they're all gone, except for
the one he's holding like a stuffed animal.
There's one under his pillow, and there's one that he's snuggling. Prince John is under Prince John's pillow, and Prince John is snuggling. And Robin goes for both of those too. And my spouse is there and goes, wow, greedy. And like that, like going after those last two actually, it's not directly, but indirectly cause all of the things that then cause the huge fight, castle destroyed, Robin almost killed. In fact, Little John thinks he's dead. Greed. Robin's greed. And as an audience, we don't think of it that way because he's not taking it for himself. He's not taking it to just count it, but still,
how is like all of the rest of the treasury not enough?
Yeah, except for two bags. And there were hundreds.
And he could have made a completely clean getaway.
Completely clean. John and Sir Hiss would have slept through it. And there would have been no fire, yeah. So, okay. There's that. Like, that's bothersome. Oh, man. I should have made a list because there were like things I was like, I gotta.
I do think I would like to talk for a minute. I did not know that this was part of why you used to say you wanted to be an animator at Disney.
I didn't just say it. It was real.
Oh, no. I didn't realize this movie was part of that dream.
Yeah.
I want to talk about how beautifully animated it is, just because it is an amazing feat. And I'm thinking specifically of Sir Hiss, who is like a hilarious character. There is a point where he gets mad at Prince John, and or Prince John gets mad at him, and so he like skulks back into. He's kept in like a basket, and he brings his
two sides of
his body up and like leans on it, so it looks like he's got his elbows up on the edge of the basket. It's brilliant. It's a brilliant piece of animation.
Whoever the lead animator was on Hiss was truly brilliant. I took special note of that moment as I was rewatching it. There's also Hiss like puts a balloon around his head and blows it up, and then uses his tail as a helicopter, which the physics of it. Okay, let's not overthink the physics of it. Obviously, that wouldn't actually work. But as a visual gag, it is beautiful and fun and whatever. There's something deeply special about the animation in this movie, separate and different from like Snow White, the very first full-length feature animated movie is gorgeous. And I do not want to take away from its gorgeousness. But Disney and his animators were trying to recreate live action, almost like Rembrandt was trying to, sort of capture life in drawing. The way that the model that they had do all of the dancing of Snow White that then they recreated as animated scene. That is not what this is.
Mm-mm.
These are foxes and bunnies and rhinoceri and elephants, and they are
acting like humans, but in ways that make physical sense for what their bodies are.
Exactly. And there's something so charming about that.
Gorgeous.
I actually think that my personal style when I'm drawing my sort of whimsical animals doing human things, like I think about the giraffe that I drew playing Jax. She is directly influenced by this movie, right? Like there's the elephants are the buglers, right? And at one point, Clucky, like an elephant is like announcing distress in the big fight scene. Clucky squeezes his trunk and it like gets caught and like backs up into his mouth, and it's hilarious.
Yeah.
And
well, even the fact that the flags are hanging off their trunks. You know? And even how Robin goes in disguise. Like he disguises himself as a pelican, and
he's a stork.
A stork. That's right, a stork. And he uses like stilts, and like it's so inventive, in a way that is so different from other earlier Disney animated films.
Yeah. It does interesting things to gender as well, right? So we talked about gender a little bit already. We have not yet talked about the fact that Robin and Little John dress in drag to trick Prince John.
That's right. One of the rhinos thinks Little John is adorable.
Yes, not just adorable. There's definitely a sexual connotation to it. So Little John, so they're meant to be fortune tellers.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
So that's fortunes forecast. So Prince John turns aside to get his fortune told, and meanwhile they steal everything. You know, when they kiss
the hubcaps.
When they kiss his rings, they like take the gems out of the rings with their lips, which
vacuum lips. You don't want to think about the implications of that.
Whoa. And they steal all the bags of money, and like to the point that Prince John is left in his skivvies at the end of it. And Little John, dressed as a woman, like he's got the gold coins in his bosom and he's got the hubcaps in his tush, and that's when the rhino notices him. And the camera like focuses on the big bosom and the big tush before the rhino sort of turns pink, like his ears wiggle and he turns a little pink and he like gives this little shy wave. So not just with these two male anthropomorphized animals who dress in drag, the only way to show gender in this, to show gender difference in this conceit of these anthropomorphized animals, is to greatly exaggerate the accessories, right? So the way we see that Marion is a vixen and not a fox is that she's got these super long eyelashes, and we actually see them looking at each other. So from Marion's eyes to Robin's eyes, back and forth, and he's got these tiny little lashes, and she's got like these lashes
Tammy
that like
Faye Baker lashes
go on forever, you know. And the rabbit kids, like we know that the one who's not a baby is a girl because she's got this giant pink bow on her ears.
Well, and Lady Cluck has like really pronounced bosom, doesn't she?
Huge bosom with cleavage.
Yeah.
So that's like an extra layer of the idea of performing gender, especially since we have a moment of literal drag that is, it's got my, wheels turning about also what were some of the messages about gender that I was picking up from that, not just in representation, but also in performance of, right? Like, and even when we first meet Marion, she's playing badminton with Clucky, and the kids like need to go retrieve their arrow, and the Clucky and Marion realize that Skippy is pretending to be Robin Hood. So they do a whole Robin Hood thing. So he fights off Clucky, who pretends to be Prince John. Little Skippy does. And then she like grabs the sword and puts it under her arm and like pretends to die. And little Skippy's like, I didn't really hurt you, did I? And Clucky opens her eyes and winks and says, nah, now's the time when you rescue your lady fair. So Skippy turns around and goes and puts his hand out and says, "Come on, Lady Fair, let's go to Sherwood Forest." So they go hand in hand off to a little corner and they're like ducking underneath a low branch. And Skippy's like, "Well, what do we do now? This is boring." Because he's 7.
Yeah.
And
or
she
it's
says,
like Ken saying to Barbie, like, "Can I stay over? What would we do? I don't know."
kind of, but also he's 7. He really is 7.
Yeah. Yeah.
And she says, "Well, now's the time when you give your Lady Fair a kiss." And he's like, "Oh, kissing? That's sissy stuff." So she says, "Well, if you won't, I will." And she picks him up because he's 7 and a rabbit.
Mm-hmm.
And she like gives him a little smooch on the cheek. And it's weird.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what messages was I getting about gender that even this grown woman with this 7-year-old kid has to do the performance of the kissing the Lady Fair?
Mm-hmm.
What?
It's interesting. I'm thinking about so I had totally forgotten about the giant pink bow in the little girl rabbit's her head on her head. And actually that gets to what I'm going for. So when both of my kids were born, the hospital had these little caps that they would put on the baby's
blue
head.
cap and the pink cap. Mm-hmm.
Well, the caps that I had alternating bands of blue and pink. So they were fine for any baby. I would have been great if they had just been anything
yellow,
like yellow, beige. I don't care. But, okay. So a few years after my kids were born, I'm seeing pictures because I think those were pretty standard issue because I'd see pictures of babies in those caps born in hospitals all around the United States. And I start seeing it's still the little blue and pink caps, but some of them have a bow on it. And then I feel like it's been since my kids were born, but maybe not. Seeing newborn baby girls, where they put this giant bow on their head.
On a headband.
Because God forbid anyone not be able to tell the gender of a newborn.
Sex. We don't know the gender yet.
We don't know the gender. It strikes me as like, why is that so important? Well, because it's so important that we know that this rabbit is a girl, that we have to give her not only a bow, but a pink one.
Yeah.
Like it can't even be like a green bow or a light blue bow or a purple bow. It's got to be unequivocal.
Yeah. Yeah. Those headbands have been around for a lot. I mean, my kid's right between yours, but I can remember like once we knew we were having a girl, my spouse was like, "Promise me you will never put one of those headbands with the giant bows on her head," which was easy for me to promise because I wasn't planning on it.
Yeah.
But,
I think the difference is that I'd see those in older babies, like
like
2 and 3 months,
3 months, not newborns,
which is still like I'm not a huge fan of, but okay, at least they're starting to be able to hold their head up.
Like, right, their skull's not still mushy, yeah.
But it's the hours old, still looking like a potato. And it's also in that time that like gender reveal parties went from a little niche thing that I hear about sometimes in like cupcakes to like, starting ginormous forest fires and killing people. Yeah. The performance of gender is really, really an interesting. And that's actually one of the things about why Prince John is kind of illegitimate, is because he is effeminate. The way that he's played.
There's something of that, although it is played much more as childish, as you pointed out. His clothes are always too big for him. The crown is too big so that he has to like push his ears out so that it'll stay up. It keeps falling down on his head. The illegitimacy of Prince John is in, as I said before, the cowardice and as you pointed out, the childishness. That's more of the focus. I don't think you're wrong. I think there is a bit of effeminate.
Well, and some of that is because of the way hiss is played. His voice is played very effeminate.
Hiss is definitely played as, if you know what you're looking for, like he codes as gay. I agree. And he sleeps in the same room. And so there is definitely like, there's a coded homosexual relationship between those two, but it is coded.
It's coded. Yeah. This is not overt. And I think even an adult in 1973 seeing it is not necessarily going to get it. It's like, I don't want to say it's a dog whistle, cause it's not, it's coded. But there are some aspects of it that I think are interesting to talk about in terms of like the way that queer coding had to work for both queer creators and people writing about writing negatively. And that's something I would love to get into at some point. A lot of the stereotypes we think of about gay men in particular come from the fact that the Hays Code from the early 20th century made it impossible to overtly show any kind of romantic or sexual relationship between men. So they did covert stuff that came to be so well known that it became stereotypical.
Right.
But one of the things that I think is interesting is that I didn't know this until like recently, and by that I mean like last 10 years, that being very close to one's mother was considered like a negative stereotype about gay men.
About gay men. The
other aspect of it is like the sinister queer person like whispering in the ear of someone. So like hiss fits that as well.
Yeah. And Prince John is definitely negatively associated with being close to his mother.
Yes.
Yeah. You know what? I think you've convinced me that is more.
I think that was, I mean, intentional in the same way that the choice to have Buttercup not bash the ROUS over the head was intentional. Like they weren't, going like, oh yeah, we're homophobic. It was more just like
reflecting the culture. Yeah. But to your point though, reflecting the culture in these two villains who aren't even villainous. They're the clowns behind the muscle, who's the one that's actually scary, which is the wolf, who is not coded as homosexual at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Thank you for drawing that out more. We've been talking for a long minute now, and so I don't want to overstay our welcome here, our listeners hanging out with us for more than an hour. So I will try to look back and synthesize, although this one's like kind of close, and so you're going to have to fill in for me. So looking back at this film that has the potential to be, well, because it is a story that has the potential to be really anti-authoritarian, but manages to not be, despite the core plot.
I do want to say about that, though, is that the myth of Robin Hood, we talk about it as steal from the rich to give to the poor, but is that really the lesson that was intended by this Robert of Locksley like tale that has been passed down? Because he was a member of the aristocracy. He was a close confidant of King Richard. It was a story of like, don't let pretenders come to the throne.
Well, that's certainly the way that it's played. That's certainly the way that it's played in this movie. I think it's significant, though, to note that this movie made in 1973, where one of the characters says the phrase "death to tyrants" more than one. We hear that multiple times, "death to tyrants," and still is not an anti-authoritarian message. Ultimately,
I've been thinking about this a little bit since the financial app Robinhood came out, and that app is evil. Like that, they're awful.
It's hurt a lot of people. I understand.
Yeah, there was a young man who died by suicide because he misunderstood what a paper loss was, and if he had just waited until Monday, he would have been fine financially.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think that it is telling that they use that name for their app, and it got me thinking about like, what are my assumptions about this story that I've known my entire life, and what was the story actually telling?
Yeah.
Even at the beginning.
Yeah. No, I think your point is well made, that my point is not actually surprising, because the Robin Hood myth is not, in fact, anti-authoritarian the way that it has been passed down. So I think that's fair. That's fair. So also from this movie in particular, the anthropomorphized animals create some really weird and interesting dynamics about power and about gender. I mean, power with the lions and the wolf and the foxes and the rabbits and the way that the different species interact makes some interesting tension.
All the most powerful characters are predators.
That's accurate. Yes. And Friar Tuck is a badger. So yes, indeed. And it came from, in some ways, an understandable place where Richard was referred to as the lion-hearted.
Lion-hearted. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I imagine that was sort of the spark of inspiration, or a spark of inspiration for this. So that made for some interesting things around gender and power. And also there were some coded messages about romantic entanglements, where we have of all these animals, but the only ones who are appropriately like paired are from the same species, which I think is very interesting in 1973, which I didn't even say when we were talking before, but I'm saying it now. I think that's interesting to note in the early 70s, that there was very much a, with your own kind pairing happening.
How long ago was Virginia versus Loving at that point? So it was relatively recent.
The Loving case was in 1967. So it was only 6 years. And these movies took a long time to make.
Yeah.
Right. So imagine they started drawing 1970, maybe 3 years after Loving. So that's significant. And not just species, but also class status, which is true to the original myth, to your point, that Robin Hood was Robert of Locksley and was highborn and maintained for this children's movie in the early 70s. So those are interesting pieces to note. What am I forgetting that we've discussed?
Doesn't pass the Bechdel test, barely passes the sexy lamp test. So the role of women in this film is quite reduced. Maid Marian is just a love interest. And the performance of gender.
The performance of gender, which is magnified by the anthropomorphized animals. Yeah.
And then that also kind of leads into it is coded, but the queer coding of because I can kind of remember thinking that a little bit, not as a little kid, but by the time I had a sense that there were people who were gay, I had a kind of an inkling that Prince John and Sir Hiss were coded that way. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that's an important thing to pay attention to. And then that also that gets into when the rhino is flirting with Little John, there is something there about how he's getting one over on him, not just in the fact that they're tricking them and stealing from them without him noticing, but there's something sexual about him getting one over on him.
Yeah. And the fact that the movie makers make it very clear that the sexual interest is about the large bosom and the large tush. They make that very clear. And there's something.
And so that means that the rhino we're invited to find the rhino ridiculous.
Yeah.
Because he is attracted to something that isn't real and is very obviously patently unreal.
Yeah. Yeah. Though it fools Prince John as well.
But one last piece of synthesis, the brilliance and innovation of the animators in deciding how to create an entirely new world of animals that use their bodies in ways that make sense within the physics of this world, even though they're not how real animals use their bodies.
But also makes sense as humans would use their bodies. Yeah. Yes. And I would also add the weaving of music, and actually even this movie breaks the fourth wall at least once, where the rooster narrator, he has a name and I don't have it on the tip of my tongue, but the rooster narrator, when they are in the debtor's prison, he looks out the window of the debtor's prison and says, "We're all here. Yep. Even me." And he's looking directly at us. And he talks directly to the audience, which is really interesting. And that I think that weaving of narrative style, starting with the book, having our narrator who is a folk singer, so that there is music, which is really, really good music.
It is.
And there's pathos and there's humor and there are these brilliant visual gags. There's a reason that I loved it, that I watched it last night and enjoyed myself, despite this voice in my head going ooh, wait a minute. I feel like I was less tight in our main, and now I'm giving you new information and what's supposed to be the synthesis. So I apologize for that, listeners, but I hope you'll come along with me anyway.
And if you haven't seen the movie, it's worth watching, even just for the animation and the music.
For real. And there's, the other, you talked about Odelaly. So they say Odelaly all the time. That's like a happy word. And then also the word that the sheriff says that I sometimes say is criminitly, which is like a curse. Criminitly, Emily.
That I also want to say the voice acting, and I don't know if this was new because Peter Ustinov does Prince John. He was a well-known actor, and this was before well-known names did animation work. And some of the voice of the sheriff and the voice of Friar Tuck are ones that I recognize as doing other animation. Oh, and Little John. But the voice acting is amazing.
Really, really good.
I mean, it is really, really fantastic. Even like whoever does Hiss, even with the issue of it being a very queer-coded voice, it is well acted.
Yeah. There's a scene where Robin is pretending to be one of the vultures who are the guards. And he says to the Robin pretending to be Nutsy, he says to the sheriff, "Shut your little eyeballs."
I love that.
And that voice, just like that, sometimes like when I'm like if I'm trying to get my daughter to go to sleep, that voice will come on my head and be like, "Shut your little eyeballs." I'm telling you, it's matzo ball soup, man. It's matzo ball soup.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, that was fun. Thank you for going along with me on that one, Em. What are we going to talk about next time?
So next time, the truth is out there because I am going to be sharing my deep thoughts about the X-Files.
Cool.
Hold on to your hats.
Yeah, that was one that was all you. I didn't follow you.
It's going to be a lot of David Duchovny appreciation.
Yeah. Oh, I know. All right. Well, I'll see you then.
See you then.
Thanks for listening. Our theme music is Professor Umlaut by Kevin MacLeod from incompetech.com. Find full music credits in the show notes. Until next time, remember, pop culture is still culture. And shouldn't you know what's in your head?